All right, so for this video, we're just going to watch and go through a couple things that you guys should have learned in Algebra 1, or if you guys are in Algebra 2 this year, you guys will learn in Algebra 2, but just want to go through and refresh your memory in case you forget. All right, so one of the things that you guys will need to be able to do is you'll need to be able to use the quadratic formula. So you'll need to be able to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Now, some of the problems that you get, as one that we'll go through next, you don't necessarily have to, but the one thing about quadratic formulas is whenever you have a quadratic equation, it will always work. It'll always give you the answer. And how do you know that you have a quadratic equation? It's when your largest power is a power of 2. So in this here, I know there's no numbers or anything written, but we know that this is a quadratic equation because our largest power is where x is being raised to the second power. So that tells us it is a quadratic equation. And our quadratic equation, this ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. That is called our standard form. All right, so whenever we're solving a quadratic equation, the first thing you want to do is you want to set everything equal to 0. All right, we want to make this x squared positive. So we want to make this a positive number. And you want to set it equal to 0. All right, so after you do that, then we have our standard form is whatever number is written with our x squared is our a, whatever number is written with our x is our b, and then the constant is c. And we identify what our a is equal to, what our b is equal to, and what our c is equal to, and then we plug them into the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is x is equal to the negative b, or the opposite of the b that we already have, plus or minus, so this tells us that we can have up to 2 answers, the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over top of 2a. All right, so that is the quadratic formula. That's something that you'll have to be able to use, and we'll go through 2 examples now. We'll do one where we don't necessarily have to use the quadratic formula, and then we'll do it again with the quadratic formula, and then we'll do a second one where the quadratic formula is needed. All right, so the first problem we're going to go through is this problem here. Now, the first way that we're going to do this is we're actually going to do by factoring. So quadratic formula or quadratic equations, we know that this is a quadratic equation because our x's highest power is squared. So this quadratic equation, the first thing that we're going to try for this one, because it's just the easier, in my opinion, is factoring. All right, we've already gone through factoring a ton of times. So this is something you guys should be a little bit easier with. So remember, when our a, the number in front of our x squared, is something other than 1, we'll use the x method. And we multiply our a and our c. So 7 times negative 1 is negative 7. And then our b is going to drop down into the top of our x. And remember, we're looking for numbers that multiply to negative 7 but add up to 6. Since this is a minus sign, we know that our signs are going to be opposite signs, so we'll have a positive and a negative. And multiples of 7 that add up to 6 are 7 and 1. And since it needs to be a positive 6, our 7 has to be positive. So it's positive 6 and negative 1. And then you test it. 7 times negative 1, that is equal to negative 7, check. 7 plus negative 1, that is equal to 6, check. So we have both of these are right. And now remember, when we use the x method, our a, we needed to divide each number by that a. And then we reduce. And 7 over 7 reduces to 1 over 1. And negative 1 over 7 cannot reduce. Now this tells us our factored form. Remember, we used the Drake song. We started from the bottom, now we're here. So the started from the bottom, so we write our 2 parentheses out. This is the number that when we start from the bottom is what gets multiplied to our variable. So it's 1x, and since that's a positive 1, it's 1x plus 1. And then remember, we started from the bottom, now we're here. So then it's 7x, because it's 7 needs to be multiplied to our variable. Since this is a negative 1, it's minus 1. And now from here, if we want to solve this, in order for 2 numbers, because that's what these represent, that multiply to each other and is equal to 0, that means one of these has to be 0. So then we say x plus 1 is equal to 0, or 7x minus 1 is equal to 0. And then we solve for 0 in both cases. We'll subtract 1, so x is equal to negative 1. We'll add over the 1, 7x is equal to 1, divide each side by 7, or x is equal to 1 over 7. All right, so in this case, we have two examples or two answers. All right, and that is not using quadratic formula, but by factoring. All right, now we're going to do this problem again. So I'm going to erase this real quick, and we're going to do this problem again, but using the quadratic formula. All right, so I'll write the answers over here. So x is equal to 1 or, I'm sorry, negative 1 or 1 over 7. So you can see that we get the same answers regardless of which way we do it. All right, so now we're going to do this using the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over top of 2a. All right, now, a lot of kids do like to use this method because it will give you the answer every time. Some questions can't be factored, so if you try to do it through factoring, you might not be able to. So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify our a, our b, and our c. So remember, our a is always a number that's being multiplied to our x squared, so in this case it's 7. Our b is always a number being multiplied to our x, so it's 6. And our c is the constant, so it's negative 1. So what you need to do when you guys are plugging these in is make sure you plug them in parentheses, regardless if it's a positive or a negative. Because between this 4, this a, and the c, we're multiplying. And a lot of times people just substitute in a number without parentheses, and they mistakenly add or subtract. All right, so we're going to plug everything in now. So it's negative b, so it's negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times our a, which is 7, so times 7, times our c, which is negative 1, all over top of 2 times our a, which is 7. All right, now from here, we'll just do the math. So we have the opposite 6, so it's negative 6 plus or minus. Well, 6 squared is 36. Negative 4 times 7 is negative 28. Negative 28 times negative 1 is positive 28, all over top of 14. Now we'll combine inside of our radical, so 36 plus 28. So that will give me, I'm going to write it over here. That will give me negative 6 plus or minus the square root. 36 plus 28, that is 64, all over top of 14. All right, then from here, now remember, this is x is equal to. So the values that we get here are what our x is equal to. So the square root of 64 is 8, so it's negative 6 plus or minus 8 over 14. So since this is plus or minus, this is actually telling us two different numbers. So that means x is equal to negative 6 plus 8 over 14, or x is equal to negative 6 minus 8 over 14. And then we will go ahead and solve each one now. So negative 6 plus 8 is positive 2 over 14, and that will reduce to 1 over 7, which matches the answer that we got using factoring. And then the other one, negative 6 minus 8 is negative 14 over 14, which is equal to negative 1, which is once again what we got when we did our factoring as well. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. This is a practice going over quadratics. Now remember, you can use the quadratic formula, which is what we did here, or you can factor. Not everyone can factor though, and that's the problem at times.